June 21, 2025. Air India. Flight 171 took off from the runway in Ahmedabad. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner departed as usual, but just seconds later, both engines failed and the aircraft began to plummet. After the crash, 260 people were confirmed dead. The crash site was devastating, but the shock deepened when investigators discovered an unusual detail in the cockpit. Both fuel control switches had been set to CUTOFF just seconds before the fall. This opened the door to disturbing theories. Questions began to arise. Was this horrific accident caused by a technical failure, or was it a deliberate act by the pilot with suicidal intent? But if the suicide theory is true, then where did the technical data and cockpit voice recordings go? Could some powerful force be trying to cover it up? In the chaotic hours after the crash, the investigation was only beginning, but speculation was already racing far ahead of the facts. Grainy videos from airport security cameras and shaky clips from nearby witnesses were shared thousands of times online, each frame pulled apart by self-proclaimed experts searching for signs of what went wrong. In the absence of clear answers, theories took root. One of the first ideas to surface was deceptively simple. Perhaps the crew had made a mistake with the wing flaps during takeoff. Flaps help create the extra lift an aircraft needs to get airborne, and on a Boeing 787, a wrong setting could make the climb dangerously sluggish. To those who saw the limited footage, the wings looked almost unchanged as the plane left the runway, feeding the belief that the flaps had been left in the wrong position. But the flight data recorder would later show this was not the case. The flaps had been set correctly at flaps 5, a standard takeoff configuration, and the aircraft's automated systems would have issued warnings if anything had been wrong. With that theory fading, attention shifted to the engines. A few seconds of higher quality video seemed to reveal a strange buzzing sound, one recognized by seasoned aviation enthusiasts as the distinct hum of the ram air turbine, a small emergency propeller that deploys when an aircraft loses electrical power. Its appearance hinted at something serious happening early in the climb, and some began to wonder if both engines had failed almost at the same time. The possibility was disturbing. Dual engine failures without external damage are extraordinarily rare. Complicating the picture further was an odd detail in the landing gear. In one clip, the main gear appeared to tilt, as if it had begun to retract, yet the gear doors remained closed. This contradiction puzzled both professionals and amateurs. Was it an illusion caused by camera angles, or a sign that the aircraft's systems had begun a process they could not finish? Each of these early theories seemed plausible in isolation, yet none could explain the entire chain of events. The flaps were fine, the engines showed no signs of bird strike or obvious damage, and the weather offered no threats. Something deeper was at play, something beyond what could be seen in a few seconds of video. But if these surface-level explanations were wrong, then what was hiding beneath them, and why did the first official report point to something far more unusual? When the preliminary report was finally released, it cut through weeks of speculation with a single, unsettling fact. Both fuel control switches, critical levers that govern the flow of fuel to each engine, were found in the cutoff position just moments before the crash. This discovery was more than unusual, it was almost unthinkable. On the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, these switches are only moved to cutoff after the aircraft has landed and is safely parked at the gate. In normal operations, they remain in the run position from takeoff to landing, ensuring a steady flow of fuel to keep the engines alive. The switches themselves are not casual buttons that can be brushed by accident. They are robust mechanical levers fitted with a detent that requires a deliberate lift and pull motion to change position. A pilot must use intention and force to move them, making accidental contact highly unlikely. Yet according to the flight data, both switches were moved from run to cutoff within a single second of each other. It was the kind of event that demanded answers and fast. Investigators turned to the cockpit voice recorder, hoping for a clue in the moments before the engines died. But there was no clear sign of confusion, no shouted warnings, no scramble to recover power. The cockpit sounded calm until the instant the disaster began. This made the report's next detail even more troubling. In December 2018, the FAA had issued a special advisory warning airlines about a potential flaw in certain Boeing fuel control switches. The bulletin explained that on some aircraft, the locking mechanism and the safeguard preventing unintended movement could be disengaged without detection. The advisory recommended that operators check their fleets, including the 787, to confirm the locks were working properly. But crucially, it stopped short of making those checks mandatory. Boeing never issued a service bulletin requiring immediate inspection or redesign of the switches. And Air India never conducted the suggested inspections on their Dreamliners. The absence of inspections does not automatically prove the switches were faulty on Flight 171, but it leaves a dangerous gap in the safety net. Because if even one of those locks failed, the lever could move with far less resistance than intended. And on a modern airliner, a single wrong movement of that lever could silence an engine in seconds. 2 movements could silence them both. Still, investigators were careful not to leap to conclusions. The fuel switches are part of a larger chain connected to the electronic engine control system, a digital brain that translates mechanical input into precise engine behavior. If the EEC misread the position of the switch, or if a software glitch sent the wrong signal, the effect would be the same as a deliberate cutoff. Either way, the aircraft would lose thrust with devastating speed. The question now was whether this was a hardware failure, a software fault, or something else entirely. And as the investigation dug deeper, the next theory would take the spotlight, one that focused not on machines but on the humans in control of them. When the details about the fuel switches became public, some commentators immediately turned their attention to the people in the cockpit. The idea was as old as aviation disasters themselves. If the machine was not to blame, perhaps the pilots were. Rumors began to circulate about the captain's personal life. Several reports claimed he had recently gone through a difficult divorce and was under emotional strain. To some, that was enough to suggest a darker motive. They began to draw comparisons to infamous cases where pilots had intentionally brought down their own aircraft. One example often cited was Germanwings Flight 9525 in 2015, where the co-pilot locked the captain out of the cockpit before steering the plane into the French Alps, killing 150 people. Another was LAM Mozambique Airlines Flight 470 in 2013, where the captain allegedly pushed the controls forward after locking the first officer out, sending the plane into the ground. These events had clear patterns: locked cockpit doors, audible distress on the cockpit voice recorders, and in some cases, suicide notes or medical histories pointing to mental instability. But when investigators reviewed the data from Air India Flight 171, those patterns were nowhere to be found. The cockpit voice recorder revealed no signs of conflict, no raised voices, no physical struggle. Both pilots were present in the cockpit right up to the end. Pre-flight medical checks, including breathalyzer tests, showed they were fit to fly. Their recent schedules indicated they had adequate rest before departure. There were no psychiatric red flags in their records and no evidence of depression or instability. India's pilot associations quickly condemned the suicide theory. They called it reckless, premature, and deeply disrespectful to the crew who had no chance to defend themselves. Global pilot unions echoed the sentiment, warning that jumping to such conclusions could erode public trust and unfairly damage reputations. Still, the theory persisted in some corners of the media, partly because it was simple and emotionally charged. Blaming human intent required fewer technical explanations than unraveling a complex mechanical or software fault. It also conveniently shifted focus away from the aircraft's design and the manufacturer's responsibilities. The possibility of simple pilot error and unintentional action during takeoff was also examined. But training records showed both pilots were experienced and well-versed in engine-out procedures. In simulators, they had drilled countless scenarios, including dual engine failure, and at no point would training suggest touching the fuel control switches during critical climb. If the switches were moved by human hands, it would have been a deliberate act, not a mistake born of confusion that left the investigation at a crossroads. If it wasn't a mental health crisis and it wasn't an error of skill, then the cause had to lie elsewhere. And the next theory would push the search for answers beyond the cockpit, into the realm of invisible threats. When mechanical faults and human motives failed to provide a clear answer, attention shifted to something less visible. Could the disaster have been caused by an unseen hand, operating from far beyond the aircraft itself? The Boeing 787 is a highly advanced fly-by-wire jet, meaning its control surfaces and many onboard systems are managed through digital signals rather than direct mechanical links. In 2015, the U.S. Government Accountability Office issued a warning that certain onboard networks, including satellite communications, could, in theory, be vulnerable to intrusion under specific conditions. That same year, a security researcher made headlines by claiming he had accessed in-flight systems through the Passenger Entertainment Network. Boeing strongly denied the claim, and no verified breach was ever proven. Still, the idea of a cyber attack lingered in the public's imagination. Could someone have remotely manipulated Flight 171, forcing a shutdown of both engines? On the surface, it sounded plausible. But when investigators dug into the data, they found no sign of network intrusion, no anomalies in the aircraft's communication logs, and no unexplained commands sent to the control systems. The fuel control switches were mechanical levers, not touchscreens or software-based controls. They required physical movement inside the cockpit to change position. A cyber attack might alter software settings or send false data to displays, but it could not physically move a solid metal lever locked in place beside the pilot's knees. That fact alone made remote interference highly unlikely. Other outside factors were also considered. Could the aircraft have been carrying dangerous goods that somehow affected its instruments? The load manifest showed nothing of the sort. No hazardous cargo, no items that could disrupt avionics. Weather reports were also clear. On the day of the crash, visibility stretched for 6 kilometers, and while the temperature was high at 37 degrees Celsius, the conditions were well within the aircraft's operating limits. Speculation about density altitude and reduced performance quickly lost weight when CCTV footage confirmed the plane was airborne before the end of the runway, climbing normally until the moment of failure. Even more unusual rumors surfaced online, including a claim that heavy rain had caused moisture to seep into the engine electronics during pushback. But official weather logs showed Ahmedabad had been dry for at least 48 hours before departure. There had been no rainfall, no wet tarmac, and no conditions to support the theory. One by one, the possibilities that came from outside the aircraft were ruled out, which meant that whatever happened on Flight 171 likely originated from within the design, the systems, or the hidden flaws of the jet itself. And that brought investigators face to face with a far more uncomfortable possibility: the role of Boeing. Once outside interference was set aside, the spotlight inevitably turned toward Boeing. The company's name has been tied to some of the most celebrated achievements in aviation, but in recent years, it has also been linked to some of its deepest scandals. The most infamous example came with the 737 MAX disasters, where a hidden flight control system known as MCAS forced the nose of 2 aircraft downward, killing 346 people. Investigations revealed that cost-cutting measures, poor documentation, and inadequate pilot training played critical roles in those crashes. This history raised an uncomfortable question for Flight 171. Could a similar culture of shortcuts and secrecy have contributed here? Reports from the past decade paint a troubling picture. Boeing has faced repeated issues in the Dreamliner program, including structural joints that were improperly documented, wiring defects, and problems with oxygen systems. In 2023, deliveries of the 787 were temporarily halted because engineers discovered gaps where the fuselage sections joined, raising fears about long-term fatigue cracks. Some of these warnings came from within. Whistleblowers like John Barnett, a former Boeing quality manager, claimed that defective oxygen systems were being installed on new jets and that serious quality lapses were ignored. Barnett's death in 2024, officially ruled a suicide, shocked the industry, especially since it happened while he was giving testimony in a lawsuit against Boeing. Another whistleblower, Sam Salahpour, told Congress that Dreamliner fuselages were not fastened correctly during assembly, creating hidden weaknesses that could develop over time. Critics argue that Boeing's corporate priorities have shifted in dangerous ways. Where safety and engineering once came first, they say, financial performance and production speed now dominate. This shift has led to a culture where potential flaws are downplayed, where warnings are buried, and where fixing a problem often comes second to meeting a delivery deadline. For Flight 171, the focus was on the fuel control switches and their connection to the electronic engine control system. Even if the levers were moved physically, there remained the possibility that the EEC misinterpreted their position due to a software bug or corrupted signal. If that happened, the engines could shut down in response to a false reading, a scenario chillingly similar to how MCAS had acted on faulty sensor data in the 737 MAX cases. The troubling part was that no additional safeguards existed to prevent both engines from being cut off during takeoff. There was no secondary confirmation step, no cockpit alert demanding verification before the engines lost power. For a company with Boeing's history, this absence was difficult to explain. If past decisions had allowed other flawed systems to enter service, what guarantee was there that the Dreamliner was immune? As the investigation dug deeper into the aircraft's design, another layer of complexity emerged, one involving not just safety, but also billions of dollars in insurance and compensation. Behind every major air disaster lies not only a human tragedy, but also a web of financial consequences. For Flight 171, the stakes were enormous. The aircraft itself, a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, was insured for its value under what's called hull insurance, estimated between $200 and $250 million. Then there was passenger compensation. With over 240 lives lost, payouts to families could easily exceed $600 million. If investigators concluded the crash was caused by a mechanical fault or design flaw, Boeing could face lawsuits, massive settlements, and long-term damage to its reputation. That kind of liability would cost far more than just the insurance payouts. But if the cause could be pinned on the pilots, especially if it was ruled as an intentional act like suicide, the financial picture changed dramatically. Certain insurance contracts contain clauses that limit or deny payouts when a crash is caused by deliberate actions of the crew. In such cases, Boeing might avoid paying the bulk of the compensation, and insurance companies could refuse full settlements to the victims' families. This scenario is not just about saving money, it's about controlling the narrative. Shifting the focus from the manufacturer to individuals who can no longer defend themselves removes public pressure and reduces the risk of regulatory crackdowns. And Boeing has been accused before of shaping investigations in ways that protect its interests. During the 737 MAX crisis, internal memos later revealed how the company lobbied regulators to limit scrutiny, soften language in reports, and even delayed certain findings. For critics, the pattern was all too familiar. A convenient theory emerges, the story gains traction in the media, and attention drifts away from deeper technical or corporate failings. In the case of Flight 171, the pilot's suicide theory fit that mold perfectly. It was dramatic, easy to explain to the public, and most importantly, it could significantly reduce the financial fallout for the manufacturer. But for the families of those on board, the truth matters far more than corporate balance sheets. They have already lost loved ones. Losing justice would be another blow they should never have to endure. Which brings us to the heart of the matter. Will the final report reveal the unvarnished truth, or will it be buried beneath layers of influence, money, and political pressure? Flight 171's wreckage is more than twisted metal. It's a silent witness to a disaster still wrapped in uncertainty. We know the engines died seconds after takeoff. We know the fuel switches were in cutoff when they should have been in run. And we know that simple explanations, flaps, weather, outside threats no longer hold. What's left are the uncomfortable possibilities. A critical design flaw hidden in plain sight. A system meant to protect the aircraft turning against it. Or a deliberate push to focus blame elsewhere. For the families, the truth matters more than headlines or corporate image. They deserve answers, not theories. Yet history shows that when money, politics, and reputation collide, the truth often gets buried. The final report could break that pattern or repeat it. Billions of dollars and a global brand's future hang in the balance. So the question is, can we trust the truth to emerge without compromise? Was this a tragic accident, a fault in the machine, or something far more deliberate? Matt, tell us what you believe happened in the cockpit that day. And don't forget to subscribe, because this story isn't over.